Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you all are doing well on this Tuesday. All right, let's talk about Nico Iamaleava. Now, if you didn't see what happened over the weekend, he essentially no show, no called, essentially just stood up the Tennessee Volunteers on the eve of their annual spring game. The reports came out that he is at least he was demanding an increase on his NIL deal that he originally signed with Tennessee. He was essentially $8 million over 4 years. The parameters of the deal he had with Tennessee and their NIL collective was he was going to receive $2.2 million this year to play for Tennessee. Well, he decided to call their bluff and try and essentially bluff his way into a $4 million deal. He wanted to double his money and essentially told them, hey, you can't succeed without me. And Tennessee, to their credit, stood their ground and said, you're not getting anything more than what we've already offered you. You've signed essentially a deal with us, and that's what we're doing. So what did he do? He hits the transfer portal. Josh Heupel said that he is no longer with the program, and on he goes, and now he's looking for a new program. Well, I had an email come into me at lockedonbyu@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out anytime you guys want. I always love the interaction, whichever way you want to do it, by the way. It doesn't have to just be email. You can be part of the Locked On Cougars Insider group. Send us a snail mail, whatever you want to do. Drop us a DM on Twitter. Always love the interaction. And Evan asked me this. He said, Jake, should BYU consider bringing in Nico Iamaleava? He also added some, I understand the situation with him, but would BYU at least be interested in him? Well, I think BYU would be interested, but the baggage, man. If you're going to hold up an SEC program who played in the college football playoff, and to Josh Pate's credit, if you don't check out Josh Pate's college football show for CBS Sports, he said that Nico and other Tennessee players essentially tried to shake down Tennessee around the playoff game back in December for more money, saying that, hey, we're paid for 12, 13 games essentially to play in the SEC championship game and the like. But anything beyond that, that's postseason stuff, and you owe us more money. And Tennessee, once again, stood their ground and said, nope, you're not getting that money. And Tennessee did play in that playoff game, got beat by Ohio State, and obviously the Buckeyes went on to win the national title. But this sounds like, to me, you want no part of Nico Iamaleava. Now, BYU did recruit him out of high school. He's from Southern California. He was a bona fide five-star prospect. I know that Aaron Roderick, Matt Mitchell, and the brain trust of BYU had discussions with Iamaleava's family. His younger brother, I think he's at Texas A&M. Don't quote me on that, but very talented football family. And on the surface, if you could just get Nico Iamaleava, you may consider doing just that. I will also add this. His numbers last year, pretty pedestrian. In fact, I think that if you were to take those numbers from Nico and say, you translate that over to BYU, are they not one and the same with what Jake Retzlaff accomplished last year? And Jake Retzlaff just led BYU essentially to the cusp of the Big 12 title game, and in theory, potentially a chance to play in that same college football playoff. There were some after BYU's absolute demolition of Colorado who said BYU absolutely should have been in the college football playoff. That's nice. I appreciate them standing up for BYU, after the fact. But the point remains is that BYU, I think, is better served sticking with what they got, and in fact, sticking with their guns and essentially saying, we don't need locker room problems, cancers, whatever term you want to use. It's a really, really tough look to look at what Nico Iamaleava did to Tennessee and say, yeah, you want him in your locker room. Now, there will be programs who delude themselves into taking him. I can assure you of that happening. But the simple fact of the matter is, the stats last year for Nico Iamaleava, I clicked out of the wrong thing. He completed 63.8% of his passes, passing for 2,616 yards, 19 touchdowns against 5 interceptions. He took 28 sacks, had a QB rating of 145.3. You compare that to Jake Retzlaff, who completed 57.9% of his passes, passed for nearly 3,000 yards, 2,947 yards, 20 touchdowns against 12 interceptions, took 18 sacks, and his QB rating of 136.6. Now, Jake Retzlaff's stats, obviously more interceptions and the like, but I also look at Tennessee, and they got a lot more out of the rushing production. Dylan Sampson ran for almost 1,500 yards. When you have a guy who goes for 1,500 yards, for comparison's sake, L.J. Martin rushed for just half of that. For BYU, their leading rusher was 718 yards. I would rather just keep the continuity as it is. And I know that Nico is considered to be a top tier talent, whereas Jake Retzlaff was he was the number one JUCO quarterback, but he was a 3-star talent coming out of the junior college ranks. He was a 2-star guy out of high school, whereas Nico, like I said, was a 5-star of all 5-stars if you go by the recruiting rankings out there. So yes, in theory, it would be a recruiting win for BYU to go out there in the portal and add Nico to their roster and let him compete with Jake Retzlaff. But I'm telling you, based on everything that's been reported, and it's been reported on pretty darn heavily because, once again, this is the SEC, it's the Tennessee Volunteers. It's going to get an outsized reaction. If this is a guy who tried to shake down Tennessee not once, but twice, yeah, I'm passing on that. And I don't blame BYU for saying thanks, but no thanks. We have zero interest in this. Now, if you want to go by the odds of where he lands, BYU, so far as I'm aware of from FanDuel and the like, I have not seen odds that list BYU among the teams that are interested in him. I do think that obviously goes more to the bias. They're going to be looking at the UCLAs, the USCs of the world, and great. But I look at this and say, yeah, no matter how good a player this is, if they're willing to try and shake down their school that has paid them reportedly, the contract was for $8 million over 4 years, and they're trying to shake them down to double their money and essentially saying, do it or else. I actually appreciate Tennessee for standing their ground, Josh Heupel for standing his ground, and them saying, hey, thanks, but no thanks. Have a great day. And I don't think BYU wants any part of that, no matter how talented a guy like Nico may be. And I also look at what BYU is trying to do in the recruiting rankings, not the recruiting rankings, but the recruiting sphere right now. Wouldn't that scuttle, I think, some consideration from a guy like Ryder Lyons if you were to bring in a Nico who's got extra eligibility? I know that Ryder's got a couple of years, obviously, mission and the like before he enrolls at BYU, but wouldn't that obviously affect maybe his decision making? And that's the other thing you got to consider in all this. So yeah, I understand the question and I appreciate it being asked, but yeah, if I'm BYU, I'm steering very, very clear of a guy like that, and I just don't see it happening. All right, we will finish up on this front talking more about Jake Retzlaff. Last year, there was a fairly prominent rankings that were put out by Pro Football Focus that listed him dead last as the worst quarterback in the Big 12. Well, he very clearly referred to that time and time again as a primary motivating factor for him going into last season. Has another publication delivered just that for Jake Retzlaff in 2025? We'll delve into that next right here on Locked On Cougars.